record button, and hopefully you have been prompted that we are recording. Once again, good morning, everyone. I'm Christine Gelly from Noble County OSU Extension, representing agriculture and natural resources. This is our August Farm Talk Breakfast program. Farm Talk Breakfast is a program offered once a month on the third Friday of the month, where we cover a topic related to ag and natural resources. Today's topic is fall gardens and how this relates to the Ohio Victory Garden program. Our guest speaker is Pam Bennett. Pam is our state coordinator for the Master Gardener program. I know some of our Master Gardener volunteers are watching right now. And Pam is also an educator in Clark County. So Pam, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Christine. And boy, what a pleasure being here. Friday morning, beautiful morning. It's going to be a great day for gardening. And is there any better name for a county than Noble County? I mean, that's just Noble County. How great of a name, right? So folks, glad to be here today with you, and especially glad to be here to talk about fall gardening and the Ohio Victory Garden program. Now, many of you are blacked out, but Philip and Donald, do you both garden already? Just raise your hand, shake your head, yes. I'm guessing that many of you on here already do some type of gardening, but we're going to talk about fall gardening. And it was rather interesting. We were doing a program with the Ohio Department of Agriculture for the Ohio Victory Gardens, encouraging people to continue gardening, not just that spring garden. And I couldn't believe some of the comments on social media. Who gardens in the fall? Everybody knows you plant a garden in the spring, right? Well, that's not true. Those avid gardeners who really enjoy those fresh vegetables can extend that season clear into the fall season. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about fall gardening, but also about gardening in general, just some great information and topics on gardening in general. So in 2008, vegetable gardening was a thing again. You know, those of us who've been gardening, we've been doing it steady for a long time. I've been doing it since probably 77, 78. And I've been doing it forever. But all of a sudden, when we hit that recession in 2008, everybody wanted to do a community garden, a vegetable garden. You know, times were a little tough, so everybody turned to gardening. We started seeing increased requests for assistance, increased vegetable sales all over the city, or the state rather. And then people started talking again about victory gardens, how they, you know, during World War I, they were necessary because people really needed the food and they could save money. The reality of vegetable gardens today is a typical family of 4 may save $500 to $600 on their food bill. That's a lot for some families. That's a lot of money. But even more important today, people are worried about getting their food locally, eating good, healthy foods, the environmental impact of buying foods that come clear from the West Coast and the carbon footprint, and then food safety. Where's my food being grown? How's it being taken care of? Are there any issues with any kind of disease problems? So victory gardens are really just, you know, something people are really thinking about since 2008. Then we get into the pandemic this past year, and people are stuck at home. They don't have anything to do. They need something. They were motivated to get outside, work outside, be out with nature. We heard that seed suppliers were running out of seeds early in the season. I don't know if any of you tried to replace some seeds or purchase seeds like March, April, and May, but there were very few seeds to be found. And just a word of caution, I'm not sure what next year is going to be, but I have heard from some of my colleagues across the country that we might see some seed shortages because it was tough for people to get plants in the ground this past year for seed production. So we'll see how that plays out next year. Garden centers, nurseries, they were all considered essential because they had to do with food production. I saw on social media that canning lids are running short. So people are doing more canning, more freezing. I've seen people begging, does anybody have any extra canning lids available? And then the science also tells us that gardening is just good for us. And those of you who are gardeners, I'm sure you would agree, there's nothing better than being outside, working in the garden. The satisfaction of growing that vegetable, growing that tomato is just fantastic for your psyche. So my goal for you and your goal for vegetable gardening is to be successful and have fun. Don't make it drudgery. Don't make it work. Make it fun, and make it fun for the entire family. And as I mentioned, we are working with the Ohio Department of Agriculture on a project to encourage people to start growing vegetables. And one of the great things about this pandemic is that we have also seen people who have never gardened before turn to gardening. So that's really cool. And those of you who are master gardeners on the line, that's something that we can really take advantage of and start getting out there and teaching the public who started gardening this year but doesn't know much about it. Let's keep them motivated and keep them going and continue that gardening. So when it comes to gardening, you've got to think about amount of time, amount of space, and the size of family. If you just have one or two in your family, then maybe you just want to plant a few tomatoes. But if you have the space and a lot of people and a lot of people in the family and a lot of time, you might grow bigger. And Christine, you probably haven't seen the movie up on the right-hand side. You probably aren't sure who those folks are, but we're going to talk about them a little bit later on in the program. The best thing to do, though, when you're gardening is start small. You've got to start small. You start big, and you're just going to be overwhelmed by the mid-season, and you're not going to enjoy it and not going to have fun. So starting small is key. And if you're going to can or freeze, you really have to think about what you're growing, when it comes due, when it comes in, when it's ready to be harvested. And, how am I going to prepare that for canning and freezing? And am I prepared to do that much work at a certain time so that I can get all the canning or freezing done? Plants grow anywhere if they have the right environment. I mean, you've seen weeds grow in cracks. And when those of us here in this part of the state, we got into a real bad drought-like situation in July. And the only thing that was growing was weeds. If we could just take the DNA of weeds and put those in our good plants, wouldn't that be great? But the plants will grow if they have the right environment. Our garden plants will grow in the shade. However, they're going to be much more productive in full sun. So the minimum sun is 4 to 6 hours, but you also can grow them in shade and still get some production. But you really want the amount of sun to get great production. The plants for full sun, beans, eggplants, those are the tropical type plants, and they really, really like to have full sun. Don't forget there's structures around, vines, trees. Think about the shade, the sun as it goes across the sky. Where is it hitting your garden? Is it morning shade because the house is in the way or a tree is in the way? Give it as much sun as possible. And probably the downfall of many gardeners is the ability to water, especially in August when it's really dry. If you don't have a good water source close or nearby, it's really a challenge to get enough water to those plants. So think about putting your garden close to a faucet. Other considerations to think about, roads, driveways, the wind direction, because the wind's going to dry things out. Varmints, if you had an area where there's critters, you really need to keep an eye on things. I don't grow sweet corn. I'd rather pay $6.50 a dozen, which is really high, but that's what it is this year. I'd rather pay that for sweet corn than try to keep the raccoons out of my sweet corn. So there's just some things that it's just so hard to grow because you have animals and rodent problems. Kids, underground utility lines, those are important things to think about. And walnut trees. People don't really think about walnut trees, but walnut trees give off a toxicity. They give off juglone, which causes a toxicity for certain plants, particularly one of our favorite garden plants, tomatoes. So if you want to grow tomatoes, make sure there's no walnut trees in your neighbor's yard nearby, and think about their roots going way out beyond the canopy of that tree. So they will cause problems for any kind of tomato plants and anything in the tomato family. With your soil, you want a rich, loamy, well-drained soil like all plants enjoy. We read that in all of our resources. Typically in a home setting, a suburban area, this is what we get to start with when it comes to growing anything, turf grass, trees, and so forth. So a good, rich, well-drained, loamy soil is going to be something you want to work for. If you are in an area where there were old houses or like an urban garden that's in the city where there were old buildings, you really want to do a lead test because there might be some contaminants in the soil, and lead and children just don't go together. So you want to take care and be really cognizant of that in the beginning. If you have situations that are really problematic, consider raised bed gardens. These are a great way to go if you have problem soils, poorly drained soils, or even if you don't have enough full sun, consider using a raised bed or a container. When you're preparing that new site, please soil test. If any of you are farmers soil test every 3 to 5 years. I mean, they are focused on it because they want inputs, minimum, outputs, maximum. So inputs, fertilizers, they don't want to put a lot of money into fertilizers. Outputs, they want a maximum crop. Well, in the backyard garden, we don't tend to think about that, and most gardeners soil test when there's a problem. We don't think about it until there's something going wrong with our plants, and then we want to start thinking, well, maybe it's the soil, maybe I got a problem, I do a soil test. I encourage backyard gardeners to do it at least once to get a baseline, to know what you have in terms of nutrients and your pH and so forth. That way, you'll know where you're starting and you'll be able to add the proper nutrients as needed. Now, important to think about, because you're using vegetables, most of these are going to be annual crops, and you're pulling them, you're removing them, you're also taking nutrients out of the soil. So if you just do a test one time and you've been gardening for 15, 20 years, you may want to consider looking at it again to see what nutrients your garden might be missing. And then always avoid working soil when it's wet. We haven't had that problem around here lately. Actually, the soil in Clark County area, we're Southwest Ohio, has been really decent to work. But when you work wet soil, you get what you see right there on the picture. You get that compaction. And we work really hard by adding that organic matter, increasing the structure of the soil. We really want good, well-drained soil, but then if we walk on it when it's wet or work it when it's wet, we just ruin all that work that we've done. If you're going to be tilling a spring garden, making a new garden for the spring, now is the time to start doing that. Remove the sod, get rid of any grasses, weeds that are there, and when the soil's dry enough, go ahead and work that soil up and till it and add that organic matter. If you're going to go in containers, keep in mind you might be using a soilless mix, although if you have a larger container, you might want to use a blend of soil and your garden soil, native soils, and then add organic matter, compost, and so forth. When it comes to gardening, you want to have a plan, and that's the same thing with fall gardening as it is with spring gardening. Think about what you're going to plant and keep in mind that crop rotation for pest purposes. You want to know what you're going to put where. And what I usually do, everybody says keep a journal. I really struggle with trying to keep a journal. So what I usually do is I take a 3-ring binder with page holders or page protector sheets in it. And for the year, I take all my empty seed packets and stick them down in those page protectors. And then when I go to order this winter, I know exactly what I planted last year and what I liked, what I didn't like. I might make a note, a little scribble of where I put the tomatoes so I can rotate them. But that helps me with my plan because I don't usually lay it out on paper, but at least I try to do something in terms of having a plan. When you're thinking about the garden, think about your crop selection. Talk to your family. If your family does not like tomatoes, then maybe you only put 1 or 2 in for yourself. You don't need to plant 25 tomatoes. Think about their preferences. But I also encourage people to try something new and different every year just to see how it grows, see if they like it. We've learned to we totally enjoy edamame, edible soybeans. And so I make sure that we plant plenty of those every year because our family loves them, we freeze them. So we try to do that each year as we can. You've got all kinds of choices to pick from. There's hybrids, there's open pollinated or heirloom plants. You go to All American Selections. They can give you some options on some of the award-winning plants across the country. And of course, the seed catalogs will start coming in here soon for this winter. So you have lots of time to sit down and really take a look at what kind of varieties you want to grow. Now, these are some of the things to talk about in terms of fall planting. So the cool season plants, these are the plants that like cold temperatures. If you grow lettuce, you know that once you hit the heat of the summer, the lettuce becomes bitter, spinach becomes bitter, it bolts or starts to send up a flower stalk, and it's not that good. So they thrive in cool temperatures. This group on the left is not injured by frost. So those actually can either go in really early in the spring or they can go in right now for a fall planting, and a light frost is not going to bother them. Typically in mid-Ohio, our last annual frost is around October 10th. Cool season plants are intolerant of hot, warm temperatures, but they will be injured by frost. So with this group of plants on the right, keep in mind that if a frost is predicted and you want to keep them going well into October, you might want to cover them or protect them, prevent a frost. So there's a difference in these two types of plants. They do like cool temperatures, but some can be killed or damaged by a frost. These plants are warm season and are strictly for spring. They are, like I mentioned before, tropical. They do not tolerate cold soils. What really happens, a lot of people get excited about gardening in the early part of May, and maybe the soils are still too cold. Maybe the temperature hasn't warmed up enough, or maybe we hit a May where we have a cool, damp May. Plant these too early in May and they're just going to rot. They're not going to survive. So they do like that warm soil. They like warm summer nights, warm summer days in order to have some production. So you really have to be kind of conscientious about this, and it's too late to plant these right now for fall. One of the things I like to do is succession planting, so I get continuous harvest through the season. One of the easiest things is warm season followed by cool season, which is what I'm doing right now. So I tore up some of my early season plants that started looking pretty rough. My zucchini's been just kind of obliterated by squash vine borer. So now I'm planting my cool season plants in that spot, or a second crop of the same plant. So I planted early squash, and then I planted, when that was finished, I planted a second crop of that same plant. So I have that succession continuing all season. With the edamame, edamame is a long season crop. So some of them are like 120 days, some of them are 109 days, some of them are 88 days. The very first year we planted them, I planted all of the same day. So they were all like 109 days. Well, that meant about 109 days from when I planted them, they were all ready to be harvested. I mean, every one of them. And I remember my husband and I in here, I mean, we were working a long time harvesting and freezing them because they all come on at one time. So I learned from that experience, I plant an 80-day crop, then I plant a 109-day crop, and then I plant a 120-day crop. So now I have an early season, a mid-season, and a late season, and I'm not doing everything all at once. The other one I forgot there is plant every 2 weeks with the same species. So like early in the spring, you could start, I start in February planting lettuce in my raised beds. And then after that germinates, I'll plant a second crop 2 weeks later, so that when that first crop is gone, I have that second crop coming on and it's nice and fresh. One of the things about fall gardening and later planting, think about what the temperatures are like in August and what the irrigation or precipitation rather is like in August. We don't always get good rains. In fact, there in July when we were quite dry, we were getting everything going around us. We had, rain to the north, rain to the south, but we were missing everything. I understand Columbus and certain areas of Columbus, the same thing, it's quite dry. So when you plant seeds in August, you've got to be really conscientious about watering in order to get them germinating, in order to get them up and growing, and also to take care of those new seedlings. So here are some of the fall crops. We're a little bit past this group, although if you could find broccoli and cauliflower in plants, good luck with that. But if you could still get them in the ground. If you were going to do some type of covering or season extension, which I'll talk about a little bit more towards the end, you could get by with some of these, although we're just getting a little bit late on pushing it. Kale, kohlrabi, radishes, you still could probably get these in. In fact, I just planted radishes 2 days ago, so these could still be planted. And then September 1st, up till September 1st, you can still plant spinach, turnips, collards, and lettuce. Now, here's the thing. It's all based on production and days to maturity. So you look at that seed packet, and if that seed packet says 52 days to maturity, it's the middle of August. We're right at about middle. We've got 2 weeks about left in August. You've got a month, 30 days. You're at 44 days. We're pushing it for some of these crops. So you look at that maturity and when you think you're going to hit that first frost. So back to planting, raised beds, containers. This is one way that you can extend that fall season, because raised beds and containers are great for keeping the soil warm going up into the fall. And you can also use soil or season extension covers over a raised bed a little bit easier than you can in the ground. So the soil stays warmer, you've got good drainage, and as we age, it definitely is much easier for cultivation. Thinking about seeds or plants, here's the challenge of the fall garden. Go to any garden store right now and you're not going to find garden seeds. They tend to eliminate their garden seeds after July. For some reason, they also think the season's over. And they don't have anything like broccoli, cauliflower, any of the plants that you'd want to put in right now. So if you're going to do a fall garden, plan now for next year's fall garden so that you can purchase those seeds early in the season and hang on to them for August and September. If you want to do cabbage and broccoli, some of these plants, start them in the garden earlier, like in August or in July rather, or start them indoors. It's not as easy in the summer months, but start them indoors so that you have plants to put in the ground at this time of the year. But the bad thing is right now for a fall garden, you're not going to find any of these things unless you order them online. And if you order them online, you need to order them early. And getting the soil prepped, working in your organic matter. In terms of planting the plants, this is what we recommend in the spring. I mean, you think about those nice, tender plants coming out of the greenhouses. It's a hot, sunny day. You plant in the middle of the afternoon and everything kind of starts to wilt. And it's wet. You watered it. It's nice and damp. Well, the wilting is because those plants can't take up water as fast as they're losing water through the leaves. So it's recommended on a cloudy day, but the reality of it is you can plan on a full, hot, sunny day because, your days might be limited. There's only certain days you can do it. But just check the soil and make sure that you don't overwater them or that the soil is wet, because at night you'll notice they'll just perk right back up when the temperatures cool down, and eventually they will get established. In terms of planting seeds, soil temperature is important, and you want that proper depth. So that's why we wait until like late July, first part of August to plant that fall garden. Fertilizing. Fertilizing is really important. Think about, again, like I mentioned earlier, you are pulling nutrients out of the soil. And this is an example of what the soil loses per 1,000 square foot with an average garden. So you're pulling those nutrients out of the soil. So if you haven't done a soil test, I strongly urge you to do that to make sure you're, you know where you are right now on your nutrient capacity. If you're not sure about fertilizing, use a good all-purpose garden, 12-12-12, triple 10. Follow directions though. Follow it according to when it's recommended. Again, I mentioned watering. Fall garden watering is really important to pay attention to. If you put seeds in the 1st of August and it's dry, they're going to kind of sit there. If there's dew at night, they'll get a little moisture, but they're not getting enough moisture to really germinate. They'll sit there until they get that moisture. So now you're backing up that days to maturity a week, 2 weeks until they get that water. So make sure you pay attention to watering, and also those new seedlings that come up. When those new seedlings emerge, they're going to be very tender. In the spring, we don't really worry too much about watering because, we get enough rains in May. It's still cool temperatures. But in August, you never know what you're going to get in terms of temperatures. So make sure, I can't emphasize enough that you pay attention to watering. Cultural practices. Watering 1 inch of water per week is what is recommended for all of your plants. That's everything. That's just the best for maximum growth. Now, you don't do that all the time. We know we kind of tend to forget, and, oh yeah, I better water the tomatoes. Or if you're like me, you're waiting in the summertime for those spot rains or those showers that pop up. You're hoping they're going to hit your area. But eventually there comes a time when you're going to have to water. Water in the morning, keep foliage dry to help prevent or minimize disease. And I prefer drip irrigation, although it's not always easy to do. So if you're going to use overhead irrigation, do it early in the day so that the moisture on the leaves is dry before it goes into night. And think about how important watering is to your maturing vegetables. If you look, an ear of corn is 70% water. A tomato is 95% water. So if you're not providing that adequate moisture to your plants, you're not going to get good production. And I learned that the hard way again this year. I am still learning continually. I didn't water my tomatoes earlier in the season in July when it was really dry. And my Jet Star tomatoes, which are supposed to be a nice medium-sized tomato, were quite small. And they just didn't really get the size they're supposed to. The second flush that's come on that I've really paid attention to in terms of watering, they're nice, right size the way they're supposed to be. The other thing with that, if you don't water and it's quite dry, two things can occur. Number one, blossom end rot. That is a disease that occurs because of inconsistent soil moisture. It has nothing to do with you putting on blossom end rot treatments or adding calcium to the soil. We have plenty of calcium in the soil for the most part. It has everything to do with lack of being able to take that calcium up into the plant. So therefore, even consistent watering is important. The second thing that you get into has to do with the fact that when you have plants that go really dry for a long period of time, if you get that really dry tomato, all of a sudden you get that maximum flush of rain. It just pours really hard. And when that occurs, what happens is you get that cracking. So you think about it, it's really dry, that plant hasn't had adequate moisture, then all of a sudden you give it plenty of water, and when that water hits, that plant takes it up, and when that happens, you get that skin splitting. So even consistent watering is really important. With fertilizing, timing is important. There's different methods, side dressing, broadcasting. Again, you can follow directions on the label as to how and when. And the other thing is there's lots of good information out there in terms of when to fertilize. Different vegetable crops require different times of fertilization. And you can see a list here. This is just a brief list of when to fertilize and at what point in time. So keep in mind, pay attention to your crop and fertilize when it's appropriate. Never fertilize when the soil is dry. You want good moisture in the soil before fertilizing. Fertilizers are salts. And if you're adding salt to dry soil, it's just going to cause issues. So fertilize after you water, avoid contact with the foliage. And, you know, people go organic or synthetic. That is all up to you and your individual preferences. Organic is great. Manures can be used. Make sure they're old. They've been composted. But manures are slower to break down. Synthetic fertilizer, your nitrogen is a little more available at certain times. This is a personal preference, and it has everything to do with what you prefer. Cultural practices in terms of sanitation. This is one way where you can really knock down significant problems in the garden. Weed control. Our Master Gardener volunteers have a great display garden, and we can't keep up with all the weeds. I can't keep up. I'm embarrassed to show you. I weed eated my vegetable garden the other day, and it had gotten so bad. But when you see weeds starting to grow, our mantra is at least remove all of those that are going to seed. And that's what I've been working on, is don't let them go to seed. Every time you let these go to seed, crabgrass, any of the annual weeds rather, you let these go to seed, you're just going to cause more trouble for your garden for the next year. And you just keep adding to that seed bank. So try to prevent them from going to seeds. Weed control is not an easy thing. I use a lot of straw in the vegetable garden. You can do a lot of different things. The vegetable garden doesn't have to look pretty, so you don't have to use expensive mulches. I use grass clippings in the spring, but I also make sure that those grass clippings don't have any dandelion seed heads in them, or I'm just adding more problems to the garden. So lots of people use different things for weed control, but don't let weeds go to seed. Weeds can harbor pests. Weeds can cause issues with nutrient deficiencies. But more importantly, I think is that issue that they can harbor pests, they can harbor rodents. I've noticed in some of my areas, I've got a few little bites out of my tomatoes from either mice, chipmunks, or rabbits. I haven't figured out the culprit yet, but they hide in the weeds and they come out and they just enjoy feasting at night. Pest control, same thing. Removing infected leaves. One of the issues that we see almost every year in Ohio with tomatoes is early blight or the leaf spot diseases. And they start at the base of the plant and they move their way right up the plant. They're spread by water, Poor air circulation between plants is one problem. So I've spread my plants out and that's helped to minimize it. Moisture on the leaf surface at night is another problem. The longer it stays on the surface at night. Now in Ohio, we can't help that. Sometimes we get those heavy dews and they're on, moisture's on the leaf all night. But removing those infected leaves at the bottom, cleaning them up as much as possible helps to prevent that continue infection on up the plant. Doesn't eliminate it because, again, we just have perfect conditions for these diseases, but it will help to minimize that. And sometimes you may have to go in and actually spray to prevent further infection. Harvesting is a critical part, a critical component of the vegetable garden. With tomatoes, you have determinate or indeterminate tomatoes. Determinate tomatoes grow and then stop at a certain point. They don't keep on growing, and they produce a crop that starts ripening at the bottom and up to the top. So you're only going to get so much production off of those either way. But indeterminate tomatoes just keep on growing, like my cherry tomatoes. As long as I provide well, I don't even have to provide staking. They'll just continue to grow all over the place. But they'll keep growing. But keeping that harvest going is going to help keep things producing much better. Green beans, continue harvesting. So harvesting is an important component of the garden. Lettuce, for instance, if you put anything in for the fall garden, lettuce, spinach, you can continually harvest that and it'll keep growing. And right now, as long as you don't get that frost, you can grow clear up until November, sometimes into December with season protection. I'm not going to go into pest management. We could talk about that at another time, but pest management is unfortunately part of the garden experience. We look at IPM, Integrated Pest Management, in our programs now. And pest management is, if IPM were easy, like I could grab a spray bottle and just spray everything and it'd be easy, that'd be the way to go. But IPM takes a little bit of thought. You have cultural practices, you have biological, you also have chemical. So we try to look at the chemical as the last option. I mentioned removing those infected leaves. Spreading things out, rotating, watering in the morning, all those things that you can do culturally to help minimize potential disease issues. Another cultural practice is look for disease-resistant plants. In verticillium wilt, for instance, look for the VFN. V means verticillium wilt when you see that on the tomato packet. So we can look at plants that might resist those particular problems. Then you also have biological. The good guys, the pathogens, the parasites, the predators. Many of you may have seen the tomato hornworm or the tobacco hornworm. And typically in Ohio, we have the tobacco hornworm, that great big giant green fat worm that all of a sudden you just see loads of tomato leaves missing. There's nothing there. And then you start looking and you find their frass. And then you start looking and you eventually find that big old fat caterpillar. If you find that fat caterpillar and it has little white cocoon-like structures on the back, leave those, because those are actually parasites rather. The adult lays her eggs inside the body of the caterpillar. The eggs hatch, the larvae chew the guts out of the caterpillar, and really it's quite cool to see. And then the cocoon-like structures that you see are the pupal cases. So the new insect will come out and infect other caterpillars. So biological controls can be used, but you have to learn to identify them. Most common biological control people know is the lady beetle, but there's lots of other ones. Those little flies that are bugging you right now that you think are sweat bees, they're all over the place and they get on your skin and they don't bite, but they just are very, annoying. Those are syrphid flies, and those are actually beneficial. Their larvae do great job feeding on soft insects like aphids. So learn your biological controls and know when to use them. And then when it comes to chemicals, we try to use the least damaging one, the one that's, you spray on and it kills everything. You don't want that. You want things like horticultural soaps or oils, things that are going to be minimally invasive to other insect pests. So when you do choose chemical, and like I said, I sometimes do when it comes to certain problems, specifically the blight on my tomatoes, I use the proper product and I use it properly according to the label. So when it comes to IPM, know the plant, know the problem, and then determine your options. I mentioned blossom end rot. Blossom end rot is very common on tomatoes and very common on squash. In fact, I had quite a bit of it this year on squash. But again, going back to what I said earlier, it has to do with soil moisture levels. If your soil moisture level is inconsistent, it's really wet or it's really dry, calcium is not available to the plants, and this is what happens. You can correct it not by using blossom end rot spray, not by adding calcium to the soil, but by keeping that soil moisture level even. All right, so late summer garden, what can we be doing right now? Well, we can be planting a cover crop, a green manure. Cover cropping is a big thing right now. You can put any of these in, although cover crops need to be planted now or even earlier in August. And the challenge with cover crops, in my opinion, is you have to have that empty spot in the garden in order to be able to plant that cover crop, or you're going to be planting it in between other plants, which is okay too. But the idea is that you turn this under and it's kind of a green manure. It adds that organic matter to the soil for next spring to help build that structure. Plant your late season vegetables. It's still not too late. I put some in last Friday, and boy, we got the perfect rain last Friday night, and I've already got some lettuce germinating. I saw it 2 days ago, Wednesday. So it's still not too late to plant late season vegetables. And then I mentioned earlier considering season extension methods. And that's another whole class in itself, but things that you can do to protect those plants from a frost, and in some cases, even a freeze. So cold frames are probably the most convenient. If you have those in the garden, you can put the covers on them at night when it's really cold or frost is predicted. Floating row covers, you just kind of lay them on, and they have maybe a 10 to 15 degree protection from temperatures. What you hear a lot right now is about high tunnels or low tunnels. These are basically poly houses. So they're hoops with the plastic stretched over them. So they give you some temperature protection. You can use cloches, hot caps, anything to protect that from an overnight really drop in temperature. Now, the thing you have to think about with this is you don't cover and let it go. If it gets really hot during the day and you've got that lid on that cold frame closed, you have a tendency to cook your vegetables. So you're going to have to maybe have some kind of way to make sure you lift that up, allow some air in during the day, because you know September and October we can get those really warm sunny days, drastic drop in temperatures at night. So you're going to have to open those up, and you're going to have to pay attention to that to keep those plants going. I know people who have grown things clear up until December, but it does take some time, it does take some patience, and it takes some paying attention to those plants and harvesting and doing everything else that you should be doing. Fall garden cleanup. We are in that period of time for fall garden cleanup in October and into late November, or late October and November. Pulling those annual vegetables, again, I mentioned the weeds can harbor insect pests. Annual vegetables left on the ground can too, particularly if you have tomatoes that had the leaf blight diseases or leaf spots. Clean it up as best as you can. Add your soil amendments, put away all your staking material, anything that you've used in the garden. Put away your soaker hoses. You know, it prevents extra work for the next year, and it also saves and extends the life of those hoses as well. Till if you prefer to. Right now I'm attempting to go no-till. We'll see how that works out. No-till is optimal for gardens because you're building that soil structure. However, you have to really kind of think about, okay, this is going to be my garden bed, this is going to be my path. So if I'm going to have a garden bed where I'm not tilling, I have to make sure I have a path where I'm constantly walking and I can reach into those beds to get those vegetables. And you know, some people will say tilling is bad. Well, we know tilling breaks down soil structures. We try to go no-till as much as possible. But in some cases, maybe you want to till, or maybe you need to till because the soil is so compacted. The key here is don't over-till. Don't go in and beat the soil to death. I mean, I don't use a tiller for weed control. I know a lot of people love those little Mantis or little tiny small tillers where they can just run through and knock down all the weeds. But you'll notice after a while, you break down your structure and you basically just have a loose, totally non-viable soil for growing. So just don't over-till and never till wet soil. Note your comments in your journal or put it in your notebook, whatever you use to keep track for next year, because I guarantee you, even somebody as young as Christine won't remember what she planted this last year. If she has that label, if she doesn't have that in hand, she may not remember. And know that help is available. I keep kidding Christine. She probably has no idea who that guy was, unless she's watching MeTV and sees Green Acres. But you guys are very fortunate in Noble County to have a great educator. I've watched Christine kind of grow over the last year or so. She's passionate about teaching. She's passionate about agriculture and horticulture. And she does a great job there in Noble County. She's one of the young up and coming educators. So rely on her. Know that she's still learning too, but she is eager and anxious and very compassionate about helping you. We also have the Buckeye Yard and Garden line as a resource, beagle.osu.edu, which gives you timely landscape information and backyard garden information on a regular basis. As we see things out happening in the landscape, we will put that in this blog. Ohio line is still available for fact sheets. When I was talking about specific fertilization for specific vegetables, you can go to those fact sheets, learn all about growing beets, when they need water, when they need fertilizer, and so forth. And most recently, you have the new project we're working on with the Ohio Victory Gardens. And the website is u.osu.edu/Ohio Victory Gardens. And we are building the website. It does need some work, so bear with us. But we will eventually have all the things that you need on there in one site for growing vegetable gardens. Because right now we have a lot of great stuff in Extension, but a lot of different people have it in many different places. It's on a website or on their own county pages. We're trying to pull it all together in one location to help everybody across the state. So with that, Christine, I'll turn it back over to you for any questions.
Wow, Pam, you are right on time.
Yeah,
I need to take
that?
on how you did that. We do have some questions in the chat, but first, thank you so much for sharing your time with us this morning to do this presentation.
Absolutely.
I see some of the questions and answers are already being answered. We do have, let's go ahead and answer some of those questions, and then I'll have a few localized announcements for you folks at the end. Okay, Pam, one of the first questions that came in was from Phil. And Phil asked, is there a soil test to test for soil-borne diseases?
No, there is not, Phil. Your diseases, I know. Well, type in which particular disease you're considering, and I can tell you a little bit about its life cycle. The diseases, the pathogens are in the soil. Typically, we test when they get into the plant. Even though they're soil-borne, we test when they get into the plant. So I'm unaware of any soil tests that can be done for specific diseases.
If you have a follow-up to that, Phil, feel free to unmute, or I see he's typing something in the chat. For those of you who may be connected on the phone, remember if you want to speak, press *6 to unmute. Some of the conversation in the chat is Don had asked, or maybe it was Phil, I'm sorry, I can't see it at the moment. Does Heritage currently have vegetable seeds? And Tammy is on, she works at Heritage. She says, yes, they do.
Oh, great.
She is also sharing for supplies.
Is Heritage a co-op then? Is that a co-op?
Yes, it is.
Boy, that's great to know. And Tammy, if you could type in, do they have plants like cabbage? I rarely see any garden centers with cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower.
I don't think they normally have live plants. She does say too that their canning supplies are back ordered.
Yeah.
So we do have information about freezing and also drying. And if Sammy Schott is still on the Zoom, Sammy is our educator for family and consumer sciences. Lori Harris is also on, and she is our SNAP education program.
Great.
Lori. So if you have additional questions about freezing or drying the produce from your garden, please reach out for more information. We have lots of fact sheets available to tell you how to do that appropriately and how to label your produce so that you can still make that harvest last a long time.
Great. So Phil, let's talk about, can you unmute yourself and tell me more about your potatoes that died after coming up? You're still muted. Christine, can you unmute him?
There we go.
Oh,
Did that
good.
work?
Yeah.
Yep,
I
tell
should
me a
be
little bit
able to-
about that.
Okay.
Well, they came up, they looked real healthy. They were going and like one morning I go out and they're kind of brown and then boom, they fell over and they just died. I mean, just absolutely in just a couple of days. And I assume it was something in the soil.
Well, when did you plant them?
They were a little late. I have to think, probably, I'm going to say second week of June.
Okay, and did you keep them watered?
Yeah, we
Plenty of rain?
it was so wet I couldn't even go out and do anything for the.
Okay, so that could be part of it. If they
Yeah.
were wet, it's possible they rotted. Yeah, so I mean, watering is so difficult. It's either too much or too little.
Right.
So that is one potential problem. I mean, did you see any like leaf spots or anything like that on it?
Yeah, they were kind of black spots appeared and then they dried out. That's what it looked like.
Yeah. I would probably go online and look for any potato diseases, but a leaf disease like that usually doesn't wipe out a plant the way you're talking. I suspect it has to do, if it was too wet, I suspect the tubers might have rotted.
Yeah.
And then, of course, then your roots weren't able to grow and support the plant, so it might have died because of that. And if all of them did it, that's an environmental problem that I would think about.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we had so much rain early on. In fact, here at least in but now it's like super dry. So
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. We never get what we want because we were so dry in June and July, but now we're pretty decent. In fact, I wish it would kind of slow down because it's really perfect for perfect weather for disease to occur.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just to echo that, what Phil is saying, and our moisture conditions vary so drastically, even just across the county.
Mm-hmm.
Phil and I have Cumberland addresses, and for the majority of the growing season, moisture's been okay. We were really wet there at the beginning of June. We have had some dry spells, but the southern half of the county has been significantly drier than we've been in the more northern part. So we have drastically different reports on how gardens and crops are doing depending on what part of the county you're in, as is common across the entire state.
Sure. Yep. Well, I would love to get to Noble County and see Noble County. I don't know that I've ever been there, so maybe sometime when we get back to face-to-face programming, I could come and do something for you, Christine, at that point.
We would love that. Thank you so much for the offer.
Sure.
Are there additional questions or comments anybody would like to share? We have about 10 minutes left of our slated time for the program. Again, if you have additional questions about local resources that are available or information about storing your harvest, just reach out to us at the County Extension Office. We'll get you in contact with the professional that's best suited to help you. Also check out that information at the Ohio Victory Gardens website. If you got an email announcement or saw the announcement about Farm Talk Breakfast in the newspaper, the web address is there. Also, Pam, would you be able to drop that link into the chat box?
I sure can.
Okay.
And we'd like for people to share their pictures of their Victory Gardens or any garden by using the hashtag Ohio Victory Garden, because some of them we're going to feature on the website.
Excellent. So I hope that we'll have some local participation in the program. Utilize that hashtag if you are social media savvy. I had a couple questions that kind of popped up in my mind if we don't have additionals coming in at the moment. One, Pam, was the pest I seem to be having the most trouble with this year is leafhopper. Have you heard similar
absolutely.
reports?
In fact, back in the early spring, I couldn't have any mustard or any of my greens because the leafhoppers were just horrendous this year. And leafhoppers, the challenge with controlling them, particularly on greens, to spray them, you need to find a product that's going to be labeled, listed for your vegetables and labeled to kill leafhoppers. And because they move so quick, you need something that they're going to ingest because it's very hard to contact them. Well, then you might have 2 to 3 to 5 days until you can harvest after spraying. So you've got to really be careful and read that label, because with leaf hoppers, you know, they're going to be all over the leaf, and the leaf is the part you're eating. And if you spray that, and then you got to wait 5 days. And I'm not a big one. I mean, pesticides are safe to use, but I'm not a big one to use them on my leafy greens, because I like to just pick them and eat them. So I tend to go ahead and just use them even with the damage on them, because they leave little brown spots, but they don't really change the flavor of greens. So if you're going to fry them up anyways in bacon grease and, you know, make them really good like that, it doesn't hurt them. But leaf hoppers can be a problem. Now on tomatoes and particularly eggplants, they love eggplants, I will spray simply because I'm not going to be harvesting those as quickly as my greens. So leaf hoppers were a real pain in the butt this spring, and they're another fall problem. And we tend to see them after harvest of hay and alfalfa. Apparently they harvest that, and then they come from the fields and they go into the gardens because they're looking for something to eat.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what I've
bad.
experienced, and also what I've found when I've researched. We actually did a video for one of our live streams about leaf hoppers. So if any of you are experiencing the same thing and you'd like to check that out, it is available on our Noble County Facebook page. Just a reminder, we are still doing Facebook Lives every day of the week, as long as I'm not on vacation for a day. Those are at noon, almost always at noon, and posted and available that you can go back and watch those at any time that you'd like. If you have suggestions for future programs, either like this or for the live streams, or timely articles or topics you'd like to learn more about, feel free to reach out. You can email me. It's Gelley, GELLEY.2 @osu.edu. You can also message us through the Facebook page if you're on social media, or you can call the old-fashioned way. We are still completely available by phone 5 days a week during business hours. And our phone number is 740-732-5681. That number still goes to the front desk, and they are able to transfer you to whoever you need to speak with. We have about 5 minutes left. Are there any additional questions or comments for Pam?
I guess I have a question about praying mantis, because it seems like right now I'm out brush hogging and I'm seeing lots of those flying around.
Mm-hmm.
Is it their mating season or something? What's going on there?
Yeah, you'll see them mating right now, and then they'll lay their eggs, and then you'll find their little egg cases. I don't know if you know what they look like, those little brown, almost like a really tiny, small wasp home or house or whatever. But yeah, they're mating right now. Typically what you're seeing though is the non-native praying mantis. Not a big deal, not a big problem. And people think praying mantids are really good predators. They are predators, but they're not the top of the predator chain. What you want in a predator would be like lady beetles, syrphid flies, where they just congregate in masses. Because praying mantids are solitary, they don't do as good of a job as the lady beetles, the syrphid flies, and some of the other predators. Lacewings are great predators too. But yeah, I noticed last winter quite a few praying mantid egg cases around. So, yep. And they eat their own, so they're not very good about that. One final thing too, I would say, Christine, about the Ohio Victory Garden program. We did a pilot project this year giving away free seeds to some of the counties, and it worked out fantastic. So next year, ODA is going to work on getting packets of seeds, just samples. They're not like lots of seeds, but seed samples for every county to distribute. So next year, Christine, we hope to have some in every county that our extension educators can distribute to get people gardening again.
That is excellent news.
Yep.
And hopefully people will have a lot more experience to draw on if they've started gardening this year. One of the best teachers is failure. And it's only real failure if you don't learn anything from it. So and we encourage you all to continue gardening or get started gardening if you're not already, for all of those benefits that Pam discussed earlier. One final announcement that we have for you guys related to our Master Gardener program is we have had some meetings discussing what type of programming we want to do into the fall and winter. And given the demographic of a lot of Noble County, we've chosen not to do virtual programming specifically as a Master Gardener group, but we do still hope to do our wreath making workshop this winter. It will likely be in a different format than we've traditionally done, given that we'll have limited space and we can't do our buffet of decorations where you go up and grab whatever you want. But we'll likely create wreath making kits that will have instructions and a collection of the materials you need to create your wreath, and then probably do some how-to videos and show you a few different styles of how to make a wreath. And then we'll allow you to sign up and come and pick up your kit at the time that the class normally would have been, unless the situation drastically changes and we open up to do that type of programming again before we get to that point. Typically we have that program the first week of December, right after Thanksgiving. So stay tuned for more details about that as we continue to plan. With that, I think we don't have any additional questions in the chat. So thank you again, Pam. I'm going to end the recording now.
My pleasure.
Thank you.